Today I'm going to be discussing sort of a quickish topic. I have discussed this a few times in the past, but I wanted to specifically make a video about using strength training to isolate abdominals or back muscles when it specifically relates to a back problem. I've seen this used quite a lot recently, and it still baffles me that therapists and whatnot go down this road. So I wanted to have a video that explains my thoughts on it anyway. Alright, so firstly, isolated training overall really is disruptive to movements, and sure, there's some people out there that do well with it, and that's fine, but the people who have problems and use this type of training to rehabilitate it or get back to normal are really going to be up against it, because whenever you do these type of exercises, they're against the function of the nervous system that uses multiple muscles one to provide, one to resist against, and one to or not more than one, to actually like work in synergistic partnership with it. So and specifically when it comes to the core, like exercises like sit-ups and even stretching to some degree, where there's a lot of spinal movement, and they're trying to like work the core like with movements like you would with a bicep curl to strengthen a bicep. But the core is different in that it's designed to more resist movement than actually create movement. So while your intention is to strengthen it, you're actually going it completely against its role and teaching it to sacrifice its stability in order to create movement, when it's really trying to resist movement so it increases stability. So yeah, all of these type of exercises, the machine ones, which I'll discuss in a minute, are even worse than the floor ones. At least the floor ones, there's some sort of element of freedom of movement, and a way of creating some balance to maintain it. But yeah, so a quick quote from Gray Cook is like, breaking down movements into isolated segments has not reduced our musculoskeletal injuries or made us fitter or leaner. And really, when you think about it, like, there's more of these exercises and methods broken down and isolating things than there's ever been, yet people move worse than I've ever seen. You may not come across so many more problems because they've moved away from learning how to move with functional movement. Example would be squats in the Asian culture are not even regarded as an exercise. They're just regarded as simple daily living, and their squat form is incredible. So they move so much better through their legs than people in the Western world who have never really learnt that at any point, and have only ever found ways to avoid it by sitting and using contraptions like leg presses to overcome the fact that their movement just sucks, and they don't have any stability or motor control to use the strength in their legs correctly. You know, and the more isolated it's become, the worse it's sort of evolved into. So why do we do this? Like, if it's like, well, firstly, most people are oblivious to it, but apart from that, most people are trying to fix the area in pain or find an exercise to strengthen the specific muscles that they've been told are weak and responsible for their pain or their movement inefficiency. We sort of tried to look at it like a car part. If this part's faulty, let's put a new one and make it better. Fortunately, it doesn't work like that, because even though there may be one weak muscle or a couple of weak muscles, there's several of them working together that may be creating this, and that's where you can't really blame it on one thing, because the muscles working further from the moving limbs and the opposing muscles working in contraction at the time of the prime mover are all a part of the problem. And until you address how they all interact with each other, you never get anywhere. And all these exercises, the bicep curls and stuff like that, really go against the way that they're designed to move, and really avoid using the brain as the main overseer of how to coordinate their role. Every time you sit on machines or do isolated things, it's basically telling your brain, don't worry about it, you're not required anymore. So it's sort of it only seems to steamroll into bigger problems. You could be using this and be using functional movements, and basically you could be getting the best of both worlds, which would be the way that I would encourage people to use it. But at the end of the day, I'd be spending tons more time here and only additional accessory exercises in that realm. So when I'm talking about muscle interaction, a good example of this would be what happens during the action of walking. So every muscle from the trunk down has one function the minute it hits the ground. All the muscles of the lower limb, glutes, quads, hamstrings, calves, everything, all are trying to stop the ankle, knee and hip from bending to prevent you from falling to the ground. So you basically would collapse. So all the muscles have the same function, which is apply the brakes and slow you down. But to blame it on one thing, like you may have a calf strain or a weak glute or whatever, but they're all involved, and the timing and interaction of their role must be in sync with each other, or otherwise you develop compensation. Eventually you wear out joints and create either tear ligaments, tendons, or wear your cartilage away and so forth. You end up with pain. But that's why it's also very difficult to change a walking action, because there's more than one thing happening. But it happens in everywhere that we move, and the core, every time we move our arms and legs, its main purpose is to hold us still to prevent movement. So machine training sucks because it basically goes against the so instead of the muscles of the lower limb trying to put the brakes on, you're actually teaching them to accelerate. And there's no stability or timing required because the machine does it all for you. So while it might be effective at building strength into a prime mover, it really does this at the expense of the stabilizers and the underutilized antagonist muscles that are not being stimulated at the same intensity in order to create the stable joints to create the movement. So basically it's completely against the nervous system's understanding of how it needs to create stability to order to create strength or power or speed or motion for that price. So all of these things are really coming at a heavy price, and they're giving you the illusion of strength. That's why people can push 300 kilos in a leg press but barely do a body weight lunge or a single leg squat. They can't even handle their own body weight, but yet they tell me they can do 400 kilos on a leg press. They're not really strong at all. They've had the illusion of strength because the stability was being provided by the machine and not by their body. The other end result is there's a very good chance of muscle imbalance. The restricted range of motion may force more work into an area that shouldn't be able, that would never have seen it because it was never good enough to stabilize it. But now it's got a thrust upon it, so there's problems there. Poor stabilizer strength, so you then recruit prime movers to become stabilizers. Endurance of muscles that should have it don't no longer have it, and ones that shouldn't do. Connective tissue is not prepared to support the new muscle size and strength, and ultimately all of this becomes a ticking time bomb for an injury. Now, having said that, you could also have all of these problems from body weight and free weight type and functional movements as well, but the chances of correcting them are much greater because it's going to be a huge bigger emphasis on the stabilizer strength and the connective tissue, more so than just the muscular strength. All right, so it's a big difference between muscular and neuromuscular, and all of the isolated and especially machines is just ignores the neuromuscular. But most of these problems are because of the neuromuscular. All right, so to change faulty mechanics and muscle imbalance, you have to identify the movement pattern or patterns and change that motor program. So an example would be I could have really good strength in my glutes and my core with planks and isolated glute strength, but in the minute I do a bending action, they don't work together well at all, and I sacrifice my core strength immediately and do not use my glutes and force everything into my spine. So the strength that I had in all those isolated things is completely useless to me because I don't understand how to use them. And that's because the brain, maybe there's a mobility restriction not enabling me to do that. At the end of the day though, there's no point trying to strengthen it if I can't position correctly and understand how to sequence things. So this is where it's also possible to be really strong in a certain pattern, but really bad in another. So for example, the core and the muscles of the hip may work really well on a squat, but absolutely hopeless in a deadlift, or even worse in single leg stance and running and walking. Yet on a squat, my technique's fine. That's usually a case of like protective mechanisms, or just poor understanding of other things. So the mechanism that you needed in other patterns is never employed, even though the strength's there in the other ones. So this is an example of where strengthening is of little importance if the pattern is the problem, and 9 times out of 10 it's the pattern. So when it comes specifically to back pain, most people would be much better in identifying the pattern that's the problem, instead of like trying to stretch or strengthen the specific area that may be weak. If they start to find out what the flawed movement pattern is, they make a huge difference to all of the muscles involved, instead of just the one they've been told is the weak one. And if you go down the road of I try and apply isolated strengthening, you'd be ignoring this and just leaving that original problem to fester and become even bigger than it already is. So what causes weakness? Well, there's many things: inactivity, muscle inhibition, so it's like one muscle overworking and preventing another one from activating. Poor coordination, so poor understanding of movement, so nothing wrong at a muscular level, all at a brain level. Protective mechanisms, so something injured, so there's a compensatory pattern employed by the body to avoid creating further damage. So it could be one of these things, 2 of them, 3 of them, could be all 4 of them. Each person's a bit different. When we're talking about back pain, and core stability is always brought up, there's 3 factors that must happen if you want to achieve the optimal stability of the spine. The first one is the ability for the muscles of the core to fire fast enough to provide stability to resist movement prior to the body moving with the arms and legs. There must be a co-contraction of the abdominals and extensors, so that they are like perfectly firing to prevent flexion, extension and lateral flexion. And they must have the ability to last long periods. If you don't have these 3 things, there's a really high chance that something will go wrong quite quickly. And again, if I'm coming back to bending actions, the prime movers are the legs. The upper body's got a role to play as well in maintaining some strength and stability, but the core's primary purpose here is to resist movement. It just wants to hold the spine in the lumbar spine in neutral. It doesn't want to flex or extend too much. Either of those problems will force all the load to go straight into it. So protection of the discs is disc pressure, minimizing disc pressures between 45 degrees and 90 degrees of trunk flexion. And this is where the abdominal brace, in combination with good hip mobility and good gluteal strength, will maintain that perfect position and be able to move any object off the ground with ease, and resist any excessive motion going through the core. But none of this is generated from trying to create flexion or extension, except it's actually developed from trying to resist trunk flexion and trunk extension. So what this tells you is you don't need to expose the abdominal muscles to massive loads or repetitions with isolated exercises to make them work alone, such as exercises like these, and especially these ones. The functional movements are more effective in being able to engage all of these muscles and achieve all of those 3 criteria that we just spoke about. So the machine training is by far the worst, because they do not require the core to fire first to provide stability for the spine. The machine will do that for you. They do not require co-contraction of the abdominal muscles, for the machine moves in only one direction and doesn't have a role to play for the opposing side to do anything, because the backrest of the machine is doing it for you. They try to, and worst of all, they try to create motion instead of preventing it. Remember, it's more about preventing motion than actually trying to flex or trying to extend. It's actually resisting it. Any strength obtained by this type of training is pointless because, like I said before, if the only way you know how to bend is the same one you had before, it won't matter what strength you've gained on these, you're going to go straight back to doing this anyway. Or, you may not have the flexibility to get there, so you have to sacrifice any strength that you've just gained because there's no other way to get down that way. So everything's the spine is going to be compromised the minute it doesn't, if you don't have that. Maybe you do have the mobility, but you don't have the strength in your legs. So again, the spine will be sacrificed to assist in lifting the load because you don't have the strength in the muscles required to do that. Now, I could train them in isolation, but again, if they don't know how to position themselves during this pattern of movement, you're assuming that they're just going to know how to do it. And I would tell you right now, they won't. They have to be trained and taught this. If you did it from an early age, it's easy to preserve it, just like the Asian squat thing that we spoke about at the beginning. So really important to understand the core is anti-movement. It's not about creating movement, it's about resisting or preventing movement. That's when it truly works. So as an example of this where the spine has been completely sacrificed. This one's probably a lot better. Definitely got more of a hip hinge, better mobility, so it doesn't have to sacrifice to do the same task. All right. So does this mean all the core isolation is useless? Well, no. There's still definitely a place for this, and I use a lot of exercises like this all the time. So I might use side planks, leg lifts, TBA activation. They're really good for in the beginning, simplifying things and teaching you how to do it, but with the sole purpose of me trying to integrate it into a functional pattern. But obviously when there's pain present, it's too difficult to do that straight away. I have to simplify things and break it down, but I'm only using them as a stepping stone to the more important movements where I'm putting it all together. So for example, say the gluteal strength is where I'm teaching the glutes to work in combination with the core and a hip extension. That's the same hip extension I use in a deadlift, but it's just a hell of a lot easier. Same with single leg stuff. So this exercise here is a great one for single leg training. This is a video for TBA activation to just teach the brace, but again, I'm not going to get very far no matter how much I do there. No matter whatever strength I gain here is useless until I put it into the integrated pattern. So the strength again is not important to me. It's how it's used when I'm standing up that is. The muscle endurance side of things, that's where you don't really want to go with heavy loads. You want to just really have light loads that last longer. Then McGill's research found out there was only a modest amount of strength that was required to maintain sufficient stability of the lumbar spine. The research established that to maintain a safe amount of stability, it was more important to have the greater muscle endurance than the peak individual strength. So strong abdominal muscles did not seem to provide the stability effect they were looking for, yet the muscular endurance did. All right, so that's a critical element to try and remember. You may have the positioning right, the ability to fire first, but you may not last long enough, so then eventually the spine buckles and you're in trouble again. And all of the strength and the understanding, the mobility is all there, your endurance is not. So that's where training with lighter loads for longer periods is more important than trying to get a peak muscle strength. So other videos, there's plenty of videos on my channel here that you can go and look about there. These are just a couple of the ones where I break down using basic floor exercises more into integrated movements, and then how I might break up specific patterns such as the bending one with all the different things required, and then overall view of all of the videos. But these are the things that you really want to spend time with and not with machines. Machines and isolating muscles are not a great way to go. So in quick summary, the strength of the core is not of great importance, but its ability to resist movement and react with fast timing to maintain good posture and alignment during movement is. The strength in the core cannot be effectively achieved by sitting on machines, and even when it is, the body's just going to sacrifice this strength if poor movement is continually used. So Your mission is to identify the poor movements and change them. Definitely use this isolated exercise to assist you in this process, but always remember it comes back to changing the core movements, the fundamental ones, and also probably more importantly, the ones that are doing the most damage. If you want more information about back pain, there's a great online program you can download. It's all in the description below. It takes you through all of the things I might assess and help me to identify where things are going wrong and then what to do about them. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'll see you on our next one.